Despite the warnings issued and despite the sanctions imposed by the U.S. and our allies, we continue to see aggression against Ukraine. This is a crisis with violence intensifying, the presence of heavy weapons and the downing of Ukrainian helicopters betray the Kremlin's claim that it is not behind the unrest. Unfortunately, President Vladimir Putin appears to have calculated that the price will be bearable, and this has to change. The ranking member and I led a delegation to Ukraine last month where we heard loud and clear the desire for strong American leadership. Fortunately, we have something to work with. The Russian economy is weakening due to the Ukraine crisis. Russia's own central bank has said that $63.7 billion in capital has fled the country in the first quarter, a figure that the IMF predicts will reach $100 billion by the end of this year. The Russian stock market, since the beginning of the year, has dropped 16% of its value, and the ruble has also lost much of its value as interest rates have risen. The World Bank has warned that Russia's growth rate this year could become negative. Much of this economic weakness is driven by the political risk of doing business in Russia. Investors hate risk. We should do more to increase their risk perception if the Russian government attempts to undermine the election on May 25th. That is a very important election. We spent time in the easternmost part of Ukraine, and the information that we received from talking to every group that we could access was that they were looking forward to the election. They felt the election would pull the country together. I think there will be a big turnout on May 25th as long as it is not destabilized. We must stop reacting to Putin's moves while waiting patiently for the Europeans to join us. Instead, we must adopt a proactive strategy that will convince President Putin that his aggression will have a significant and lasting cost to the Russian economy and ultimately to his rule should he intervene in that election. We must also undermine Russia's ability to use its oil and gas exports to offset its economic weakness. Oil and gas make up over half of Russia's national budget. It is 52% of the support for the military and the government there. It is 70% of the exports. President Putin understands that he is vulnerable to even small reductions in energy revenues. To accomplish this longer-term goal of leverage, we must enhance energy efficiency in Ukraine and other countries that have traditionally depended on subsidized Russian energy exports in Eastern Europe. We must assist European countries in developing their own energy resources. When we were there, we talked at length with the government in Ukraine about the ability to develop shale gas in the western part of that country and to bring new sources of energy to the European market, including through expediting the approval of LNG export facilities and ending the U.S. ban on crude oil exports. Both in Poland and in Lithuania, they are working on bringing online a receipt station for LNG by the end of the year. And the reality is that they're very desirous, since we have a glut on our market, of having exports come from the United States into Eastern Europe. As you know, the Poles can directly flow that gas into Ukraine. By allowing abundant U.S. energy resources to flow to Europe, we can help end energy dependency on Russia, helping to weaken Moscow's economic and political grip of its neighbors. We must also expand and sharpen our international broadcasting to Russia and to Ukraine and others in the region in order to counter the propaganda that Moscow is peddling to spread instability and fear that it can then exploit. One of the most important things that can happen here is if we get back up on our feet with the type of effective broadcasting Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty used to do into that part of the world. So this committee just passed and the President signed legislation to improve broadcasting into Ukraine. We are in an information war, and we are looking to see what else is needed in this effort to have surrogate radio bring real news in real time in terms of what is actually happening in the eastern part of the country and in Russia into that region. It is essential that the U.S. reinforce our defense commitment to our NATO allies, such as Poland and Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, to ensure that President Putin does not miscalculate and initiate a far more serious confrontation. But our NATO allies must take long overdue steps to increase their defense spending to 3% of GDP. I feel that there are some real challenges here, and I fear that our failure to match our warnings with equally strong action has undermined our credibility in some ways. It is my hope that we can restore our credibility by convincing President Putin that he is indeed risking his future in pursuit of objectives that are unworthy of a great nation. I now turn